Hello, and welcome to the ECR Retail Loss Sell More and Lose Less podcast series. My name is Colin Peacock. I've worked in the retail and FMCG business for more than 40 years, working on the dark side of retail on retail loss at every point in the supply chain. And in this particular episode, I'm talking to Richard Thalemann. He is the food waste expert supporting ECR Retail Loss. He has 30 years of experience in food waste with Tesco and retail. And we're looking forward today to a conversation about eggs. Eggs, you say? So we did a bit of a pre-meeting survey around eggs. And in truth, the survey results didn't indicate that eggs were right up there in terms of being a big problem for a lot of retailers in terms of the levels of food waste or loss associated with it. I mean, at the opposite end of the scale would be bananas that we have mentioned in a previous podcast. Nevertheless, there were quite a few interested. I think we had 20 plus retailers, different retailers interested in joining the meeting and completing the survey. We did some numbers in terms of the root causes, and then talked about what some of the interventions might be. A particular optic that we came at this meeting from was, and it's perhaps, it is a European as well as the UK legislation, that if one egg is broken within a case of 6 or a box of 6 or a box of 12, all those eggs in theory have to be destroyed because of the risk of salmonella. And that's particularly optical. I mean, one retailer sort of stated that losing, £2 million this year, in a year, I should say, around this particular problem. So it might be very small as a percentage of sales, but it's quite a big quantum number, and certainly generated some discussion with the retailers. And to take us through the findings and take us through just generally what he knows about the problem of egg waste or waste around eggs is Richard. Richard, what have you written down?
Yeah, so it was an interesting conversation, as you say, and I think we did go from the very probably years ago, having broken eggs, they would take the eggs out and put them in another box and sell them on, and of course you can't do that now. But it is crazy the amount of eggs that are being thrown away due to one egg being smashed in a carton. And I think they were talking about that there's the legislation in there that's being spoke about, so that maybe that will change in the future. But for now, it doesn't. And I think there was some talk as well about people not believing it was a big issue, as in not a big number of waste. And I think some of that we got down to in the conversation was around because nobody really wants to clear up egg waste. It's an incredibly messy job to do and very sticky mess to do. And, when that happens, I think there's a lot of shrink that happens in here. So, people not wanting to deal with it, just throw it away because they don't want to deal with the mess. And then it will just come out in shrink. And I think what we're talking about in some retailers that I think one of them had combined shrink and waste on eggs for that very reason. But then meanwhile, in other retailers, they may not be really looking at it. When they pull the numbers on waste on eggs, it might be relatively small because of that fact.
So it's a recording issue, as you're saying. It's a recording issue. Yeah, I mean, shrink, certainly in the purposes of the ECR language police, is generally known as unknown loss. So it's the stuff you find about, a year after it's happened, sort of thing, when you do your modern stock take or whatever.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, sorry, I should have corrected that for the other markets where they describe shrink as waste. I think the interesting thing that came out is around, we talked about packaging, we talked about merchandising, and merchandising is a real key factor in this. There's merchandising where you have cases of eggs where people, and I remember in my time in retail, is that when boxes of eggs were merchandised on top shelves, the whole bay, but on top shelves, you're having to lift that above your head. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do, and they're not the most sturdy of boxes because all of the egg cartons are moving around in between. So there was certainly damages coming from that. And then, of course, you're expecting that all customers are of a certain height where they can reach that first box where it's right on the top shelf in any case. So that in itself causes waste. But one of the bigger ones that I always see for a number of reasons are these shippers of eggs, where they rip the front of the shipper off and then you can just grab eggs. And for some reason, we always end up with, if you look at it, there's a layer of cardboard in between them all, but for some reason people are pulling eggs out from underneath the bottom ones. And I can only assume that it's a customer habit because they're used to pulling better date codes from the back of the shelf or at the bottom. But of course, when it comes in a shipper, they're all the same date code. So you've got this problem of this sort of, tipping effect when somebody's pulling eggs out the bottom. It only takes a matter of time before the boxes at the top start falling down. And then, of course, smashed eggs at the top. If people, if there's not colleagues around to be clearing that up very often, they can then start spoiling other ones that are nearby. And because these shippers are at the bottom as well, there's also the trolley smashing into the front of these, which also causes waste in damages through that way.
Which we never know about.
No, exactly. So I think there are lots of merchandising factors here that should be considered, as well as the packaging and the way that it's packaged.
Yeah, to your point about sort of repacking the eggs, it seemed that was problematic with European law. Yeah, I have seen it in practice, in some retailers are doing it. So I don't know how they get around it, but it does seem not just in the UK, I'm talking about in other countries as well. The point you make about shelf life is interesting because this is the sort of like, surely we can teach shoppers a bit more about food waste, and yet we give about 90 days worth of shelf life, or we start marking down eggs almost like 45 days before they would actually expire or something. So what's the numbers on that? I can't remember.
I don't have a note on that, but yeah, you're absolutely right, because not only do they have a long life anyway, we are marking them down because it's probably one of the only, I can't think of any other products where you have those 2 dates on it. So it's like, sell by and then use by. And so even when you buy them at the date that they have to sell them by, you've still got a considerable amount of time to use them at home. So I don't think there's a shelf life issue for customers. But I think people still look at that date that when they reduce it by, people are just conditioned to think, well, it's got a yellow sticker on it, so therefore I've only got today to use it. And that's quite a difficult one to sort of circumvent, I guess, because you can't really change that without highlighting the dates in a better way. I do remember they kind of hid that back in the day when I first joined retail. I was always a bit confused by it, but on bread they used to have a date on it, and then it had a number in brackets, which meant that was the date you reduced it by. So it used to say bracketed 3, and that was the date you had to sell it by, so that consumers would only ever see the date it had to be eaten by, and the one that you sold it by was hidden. But that always seemed, it was a bit baffling to me when first coming into retail, but then it makes sense now looking back on that, why they do that.
Yeah, there's a whole stream of thoughts and 5 hours worth of conversation about shelf life coding and dates and how are they communicated around that. The other sort of strange thing around, before I come on to a substantive point, but one of the other things we do is we look at losses on self-checkouts, and particularly scan and go. And because the consumer habit is to open up the box of eggs before they buy them, we often find that when we do shopper audits, that eggs are one of the top items on there because people doing that action, they forget to scan.
Okay, yeah.
Excuse me. But I think the bigger point you raise around eggs is perhaps there is a bigger problem here because we're not recording it, because it's difficult to record. The eggs are broken. And in terms of donations, what's this, if you've got eggs that are past their use by date, they can be donated, right?
Past the sell by date, yeah, because they're still within use by date. So yeah, they definitely can be donated, but it's a shame that you can't donate the ones that only had one broken egg in, right? Yeah, and they could make use of that. But let's hope something comes in that can change that as a legislation, because as you say, other markets still do that. It's just here that we're not allowed. So, but yeah, they definitely can be donated, and probably one of the the better things to be donated from a charity point of view as well, because that's exactly what people need, protein and stuff that lasts a bit longer than just today, tomorrow.
Yeah. In terms of future of egg waste, I suppose, we just got to get better at recording is probably the main point that retailers could take away from this podcast, is probably check the true size of your problem.
Yeah, and I think the point about damages due to merchandising and how they merchandise, whether it's shippers or top shelves, if we actually recorded egg waste properly, you'd probably find that in shops where they had shippers, for example, might have higher egg waste, and it would give you the answer to your problem. So I think with the recording of eggs, like you said, is probably the key factor here in understanding what's actually going on.
So getting good data and then understanding variation. No,
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. That's really helpful. Well, look, that ends our discussion on egg waste. I don't suppose it's something we'll return to in the next 12 months, but if we start to see new data emerging, to your points, that starts to link in with some of the things that collaboration can start to acting on, which is the merchandising of eggs, that'll be very good. It's interesting. We still keep eggs in an ambient temperature. Over in America, you've got an additional problem: is they go out of temperature because they're all sold chilled.
Yeah.
So at least we've got it simpler than the Americans on this particular occasion across Europe.
Yeah.
But no, thank you so much, Richard, and we'll see you next time. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to all the ECR Retail Loss community for the sharing of their knowledge, their research and latest learnings that ensure that we become truly a global platform for learning. My name is Colin Peacock. This is the Sell More and Lose Less podcast, and if you liked it, please subscribe so you automatically get all future episodes. And also, if you think your colleagues and friends might also like it, please ask them to follow ECR Retail Loss on LinkedIn and tune in to our next podcasts. If you didn't like it, then let us know and we'll try and fix it. Either way, see you next time. Thank you again.